Let's open to the book of Revelation, chapter 20. This evening, we're looking at the hinge upon which biblical interpretation rests if you want to understand all 1,189 chapters of the Bible. The Bible is a beautiful revelation of the character and of the kingdom and of the redemption of our God. But surrounding that is the way He's going to do that. And it's very hard to understand that if you relegate a lot of the Bible to not mean what it says. So Revelation 20 is the 12th and final promise that God made to Israel. And if you remember, we're looking at the successive promises that God directly, unconditionally made to Israel. And those promises have taken us through a journey that has a lot to do with biblical prophecy. But this evening is really, really the future, because this is paradise coming to earth. In fact, this is what so many groups spend their lives trying to do humanly. They're trying to keep all the animals alive and trying to keep all the plants and the trees alive, and they want to make the water pure and the air pure. But actually that won't happen until God does it. But there is a utopia coming, and we're going to begin on that this evening. But the 12th promise that God made to Israel is this. God promised in His Word that Jesus would return as Israel's Messiah. Remember, there's a big difference between the second coming of Christ, when He comes as Israel's Messiah, and the return of Christ for the blessed hope of the saints, for His church, when He comes to rescue them from the wrath that's going to be called the time of Jacob's trouble. So remember, Jesus is promised to be returning as Israel's Messiah. Jesus Christ, the pierced Messiah, at His return will rescue the Jews at their darkest hour by fighting for them. When Christ comes for His church, He doesn't fight for them. He just takes them. And that's why it's called the blessed hope. But for Israel, He rescues the Jews, coming as their warrior in their darkest hour, and finally as the ultimate. You've heard of the Jewish prowess in military. Well, wait till the world meets the ultimate Jewish fighter. One man, the God-man, takes the whole armies of the world on. But He takes them on as Israel's Messiah. Very interesting to think about how things are shaping up for that. After defeating all of His enemies, after locking up the fiercest adversary, the devil himself, then the Lord allows the Jews to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem. That temple becomes a place for all the world to visit. In fact, the Scriptures say in the prophets of the Old Testament that during this time, that if you don't come to visit the temple in Jerusalem, then it won't rain on your field. See, God can do that. It's kind of like sprinklers. He can turn them off, and it won't rain. It says, upon any group of people that don't come and make the pilgrimage during this time of Christ's rule to Jerusalem. And finally, that Jesus Christ, the Son of David, will sit as the promised King on the throne of David. Now, this is very fitting. We talk about this tonight because we sing it. And He shall sit upon the throne of His father David. You ever do that Christmas carol? You remember that? You think about what that's saying. That's saying that David's throne is not in heaven. David's throne is on earth. And Jesus is coming to take His place as the rightful King, the anointed Messiah, promised one, to sit on the throne of His father David. Well, let me just read that again. This is what God promised in His Word. Jesus will return as Israel's Messiah. The pierced Messiah will rescue the Jews at their darkest hour after defeating all their enemies and locking up their fiercest adversary, the devil. They will rebuild their temple in Jerusalem for all the world to visit. And finally, Jesus Christ, the Son of David, will sit as the promised King on the throne of David. That's one promise, all those pieces, and it's God's final promise to Israel. And God keeps His promises. That multi-part promise that God made and its coming fulfillment is actually the dividing line between the two groups within Christendom. Now remember, this is not salvific. This is not determine if you're saved or not. This is kind of like people make choices with the Bible. And some people make choices that they want to understand everything, and so they keep going till they understand how it's possible that God could say all these things that look like they're paradoxical. The other group just says, anything we don't understand, we're just going to allegorize and make it all to be with the church. And those two groups really divide the church today. I'm talking about professing, confessing Christianity. I'm not talking about cults. I'm talking about within Christendom. So basically, the dividing line between dispensational theology. What's dispensational? That God has this successive plan, and that plan is going to ultimately go from the church to him returning to his plan with Israel. And that there are dispensations that God has within his household of what he's doing. Now basically, dispensational theology would be the theology of Calvary Bible Church, and of Dallas Theological Seminary, and of Moody Bible Institute, and of Chuck Swindoll, of Charles Stanley, of John MacArthur. So you can kind of, if you read books, you kind of figure out what they are. Of the Schofield Study Bible, and of the MacArthur Study Bible, and of those kind of things. The other side of believing church people would be the covenant theology. That would be the theology of St. Augustine and the Roman Catholic Church. That's who invented it, St. Augustine. And it's the heartbeat of what the Roman Catholic Church believes. That, of course, is what one of their finest priests believed. Martin Luther in the Lutheran churches. That's covenant theology. John Calvin in the Reformed churches, etc., etc. And you could add to that, R.C. Sproul and D. James Kennedy and all those people. So we're talking about believers here. But we're talking about half that believe that God has a promise that he's made to Israel for their Messiah to come and rescue him and to set up his kingdom and sit on that throne. And the others say, well, that's not what it sounds like. It means something else. So you could basically divide the church into those two pieces. And each day, with this divide, countless believers of both persuasions, covenant and dispensational theology, all over the earth, cry out for Revelation 20 to happen. I don't know if you realize that. In fact, some of you might, even when you're in your car, or when you're sitting at a meal, or even when you're at a worship service, or even at a Bible study, you might cry out for the rule of Jesus Christ as king over all the earth to commence. In fact, most of us know well this cry. In fact, I'm going to start it. See if you can follow along with what, for the last 2,000 years, the born-again, regenerated, believing Church of Jesus Christ has cried out to him in the most powerful Greek tenses there can be. They're aorist imperatives, and it means, God, make this happen. Make this happen. You promised, make it happen. See if you can catch this prayer. It goes like this. And if you know it, you can follow along with me. Okay, I'm going to read it. Here it is. Our Father, who art in heaven. Do you know it? Say it with me, because we're going to get to the cry for the kingdom. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Whoa. Did you catch that? God, make your kingdom that you promised in 1/5 of the Bible. Your kingdom where the desert will blossom as a rose, where the poisonous animals will not be poisonous, serpents and spiders will not be poisonous, where the carnivorous will not be carnivorous, where there will be no warfare on the planet, where there will only be peace, where everyone will be sitting under their vine, no one will be robbing and pillaging and plundering and raping and murdering. There's going to be a kingdom like that, and it's not in heaven. It's on earth. And that's where all these utopian communes that have sprung up throughout all the centuries, they kind of got a little bit of the truth there. They wanted this utopia. But God says, only I can bring it. And I'm going to bring it to earth. It's right here in Revelation 20. So when you pray that, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth just like it is in heaven, you're crying out for God to fulfill that final promise that he made to Israel. and you're crying out for Jesus Christ to come as the warring King, the Messiah, to save His people in their darkest hour. I just listed off what almost every minor prophet talks about. If you ever have trouble understanding the minor prophets, it's because you don't realize what they're talking about. They're talking about the literal people of Israel that are in their darkest day because of their persistent rejection. And when they have nowhere else to turn, when they have nowhere else to go, they look up. And as He's coming, they recognize Him as the Messiah that 2,000 years ago they pierced on a cross. And it says they sorrow as one who loses their only child. And they wail and weep, realizing that they and their forefathers have rejected Him for so long. But He rescues them. Yes, that's the Lord's Prayer He taught to His disciples. And that's been the heart's cry of Christ's church. And that is the call for Christ to return to restore Israel again to the place that God planned, and to see Christ sit on the throne of His father David. How fitting. At Christmas we should study this, because that'll jump out of all the Christmas carols to you when you think about this truth